If you were reading the news from the fall of 2019, before COVID-19, if you can really remember back that far, you may have come across some headlines like reading scores fall on 2019 NAEP test, or U.S. education achievement slides backwards, substantial decrease in reading scores among the nation's eighth graders. You may have read this article from the New York Times. Reading scores on national exams decline in half of the states. The results of the test, which assess a sample of fourth and eighth grade students, will eventually prompt demand for policy change. The sentiment and alarm reflected in these headlines were really the motivation for this summit. Why are we seeing steep declines in reading, particularly for struggling readers? Why are the scores declining so widespread across the United States? And what can we do to reverse these declines? Today, I will provide a deeper look at reading achievement at grades 4, 8, and 12, and provide 4 key takeaways that you should know from these latest data. With these data, we hope to spark conversation and action that can combat the widening of the reading achievement gaps. To start, I'll provide an overview of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, also known as the nation's report card. NAEP has provided information about students and what they know and can do across various subjects for over 50 years. Congress mandates that the National Center for Education Statistics, also known as NCES, collect achievement data at grades 4 and 8 for mathematics and reading every 2 years. During January through March of 2019, NCES administered reading assessments to around 150,000 fourth graders, 143,000 eighth graders, and 27,000 12th graders. In addition to national level results, we also provide state and selected district level results at grades 4 and 8. We report average scores for student groups on a 0 to 500 point scale. We also report scores for lower, middle, and higher performing students. These scores are at the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles, respectively. We measure students' reading comprehension with 2 text types, literary and informational. We provide scores for each of these content areas. And finally, we report the percentages of students who reach or exceed NAEP's achievement levels: NAEP Basic, NAEP Proficient, and NAEP Advanced. The National Assessment Governing Board sets NAEP achievement levels and defines skills and knowledge that students should know and be able to do at each of these levels. I should also note that NAEP Proficient does not represent grade level proficiency, but solid academic performance and competency over challenging subject matter. How does NAEP assess students' reading comprehension skills? Here's a sample passage from the 2017 reading assessment at grade 8. Beginning in 2017, NCES administered NAEP's reading assessment digitally. Students are provided Surface Pros. They typically read 2 sets of passages, each accompanied by 9 to 12 questions, and a total of about 60 minutes. In this example, students read the article "To Everything There Is a Season" and responded to a series of multiple choice and constructed response questions. They can scroll to the next page as shown by the left navigation bar. And here's an example of a multiple choice question on which the student has to click to lock in their answer. For constructed response questions, students must type their response. Before digging into NAEP's results, which speaks to students' reading comprehension skills, It is worth noting that NCES administers other large-scale assessments that provide insight about student and adult reading literacy skills. International assessments such as PEARLS, PISA, and PIAC show that the United States does relatively well compared to others internationally in reading. These rankings, however, do not tell the full story. First, the United States' climb in international rankings in recent years has been partially achieved by other countries' declining scores. This happened in PISA in 2018. Second, the United States rankings depend on other countries who are also participating in the assessment. Who are they ranking against? And third, the NAEP test is a bit more challenging than the literacy tests internationally, such as the PEARLS and PISA. I'll return to this point later. According to NAEP, reading achievement hasn't changed much nationally. NAEP has tracked progress in reading since 1992. At grade 4, there was a slight increase over the last 3 decades, but the average score declined in the last 2 years from 222 in 2017 to 220 in 2019. At grade 8, we see a similar pattern, with a slight increase over the long term, but a score decline from 287 in 2017 to 283 in 2019. Finally, at grade 12, we see a different but alarming result. The reading score in 2019 was lower than it was in 2015, as well as lower than it was nearly 30 years ago. But those were just average scores. Let's move from the high-level view to a more detailed look at the full distribution of student performance. Here's a bell curve showing how 4th graders scored on reading. Most students hovered around 230 points. As I mentioned earlier, the National Assessment Governing Board sets achievement levels for each assessment and grade to identify skills that students should know and be able to do. For 4th grade readers, students scoring at or above NAEP Basic 208 should be able to locate relevant information, make simple inferences, and use their understanding of the text to identify details that support a given interpretation or conclusion. Students scoring at or above NAEP Proficient should be able to integrate and interpret text and apply their understanding of the text to draw conclusions and make evaluations. And those at the NAEP Advanced 268 should be able to make complex inferences and construct and support their inferential understanding of the text. The average score for grade 4 reading, 220, was located in the NAEP Basic range. While the NAEP Proficient is an aspirational goal, signifying strong performance over challenging tasks, I'm going to spend my time discussing students who have scored below NAEP Basic. 34% of 4th graders did not reach a NAEP Basic cut point. Those who scored in the 10th percentile, the 25th percentile scored below NAEP Basic. For more context, the average score for students eligible for the National School Lunch Program was 1 point shy of the NAEP Basic score. So, what type of reading skills do students at the lower and upper end of the performance distribution demonstrate? The 2018 Oral Reading Fluency Study, which you will hear more about in a following session, examined foundational reading skills for 4th graders. The study supplements what we know about students' reading comprehension skills from NAEP by providing more information about students' ability to read short passages aloud with speed, accuracy, and proper expression. Here's an example of a student who scored below NAEP basic reading a passage about guide dogs.
Guide dogs lead very interesting lives for 10 or 12 years. They are in charge of coding a billion percent.
Students scoring in the NAEP proficient range can read the passage much more smoothly. Here's an example.
Guide dogs lead very interesting lives. For 10 or 12 years, they are in charge of guiding a blind person.
Now that I have described the NAEP reading assessment, let's look at the major findings from the latest data collection. Here are 4 things you should know. We've seen declines in reading performance in recent years, particularly among our most struggling readers. 2, the declines are not an issue for just minority students. 3, lower performers come from many backgrounds. And 4, with data from our new monthly school survey, we see there are disparities in learning opportunities during the pandemic that may worsen the gaps between lower and higher performers in reading. So now I'll take you through each of these points. As I mentioned in the beginning, NCES reports scores for lower, middle, and higher performing students. I'll show you these results and how declines, particularly among our lowest performers, are notable. Here are trend lines for 4th graders scoring at the 10th, 25th, 50th, 75th, and 90th percentiles in reading. The trend lines span from 1992 to 2019. We consider lower performers as those who score at the 10th and 25th percentiles, while those scoring at the 75th and 90th percentiles are higher performers. Here are the percentile scores for the first year, 2009, 2017, and 2019. If you see an asterisk, it means that the score is significantly different from the 2019 score. Over the long term, scores improve for all performance levels except for the 10th percentile. During the last 2 years, however, our percentiles, except for the higher performers at the 90th percentile, has score declines. The number of points that each percentile level decline are shown on the right, between 1 and 3 points. At grade 8, you'll see some interesting patterns in the curve of the percentile trend lines. The top appears to be moving up, while the bottom seems to be moving downward. The scores confirm what you saw visually. While all percentiles except the 10th percentile made gains compared to 1992, higher performers made gains since 2009, while lower performers declined. Most recently, however, all percentiles had score declines as shown by the asterisk, and the score change value to the right. You may notice that the declines for the lower performers, 5 and 6 points, are greater than the declines for the higher performers, 1 and 2 points. Moving to grade 12, you may see a downward turn at the bottom. Adding the scores, we see a more complicated picture. While the reading score for our highest performers at the 90th percentile improved over the long term, scores for our middle and lower performers dropped. Compared to 2015, lower performers were the only group to show declines. Looking over the decade, you'll see the recent declines made by higher performers did not erase the progress they made since 2009. Lower performers, on the other hand, are worse off. At grade 4, we saw no change in average reading scores, indicated by the gray diamond, but that diamond is misleading. What really happened was that the gains made by the middle and higher performers were neutralized by the score declines made by the lower performers. We call this diverging trends. At grade 8, there is a similar story. No change in the average score, but higher performers actually made gains while lower performers declined. And at grade 12, higher performers held steady, while middle and lower performers had score declines. Across the board, NAEP has shown that lower performing students are struggling with reading more now than they were a decade ago. So, who are making these declines? The answer may not be who you have expected. We saw how widespread the recent score declines in the 8th grade reading were and how lower performers declined more. Taking a closer look, we see that lower performers from most racial ethnic groups experienced the decline. Here's a table indicating how score changed at the 10th and 25th percentiles across race and ethnicities. Compared to 2019, all groups except Asian Pacific Islanders students had declines at the 10th percentile. Compared to 2017, declines at the 25th percentile occurred for white, Black, and Hispanic students and students of 2 or more races. Compared to 2009, we see declines at the 10th percentile for all race ethnicities except Asian Pacific Islanders and Hispanic students. Asian Pacific Islander students improved at the 25th percentile, while white and Black students had score declines. The recent declines for lower performers were not concentrated for any one group of students. When looking at scores for lower performers, it would be helpful to know who they are. Let's take a look. Here's a group of 100 lower performers in 8th grade reading. The students scored below the 25th percentile. 1/3 of them are white. About a quarter are Black. A little more than a third are Hispanic. 3% are Asian Pacific Islander. 1% are American Indian, Alaskan Native, and the remaining 3% are students of 2 or more races. This racial ethnic composition is similar at grades 4 and 12. So when you see results for lower performing students, don't forget this picture of all racial ethnic groups that make up these students. Lower performers are a mix of other factors. About 70% of them are eligible for the National School Lunch Program, while the remaining third are not. About 40% have parents who did not graduate from college, meaning that over half have parents who did. Nearly a third are classified as having a disability, while 2/3 are not. And about a fifth are English learners, making the majority not. Aside from demographics, we also have data that show skills among lower performers vary. The oral reading fluency study split students below NAEP basic in grade 4 reading into 3 categories. Low represents the bottom third, medium represents the middle third, and high represents the top third. Students performing in the low level could read 71 words correctly per minute when reading a passage out loud. The word count increased to 95 words for those in the medium level and reached 108 words for those in the high level. All of these totals were below the average student word count of 120 words. The chart to the right shows the proportion of fourth graders who score in the low, medium, and high level below NAEP Basic by their race ethnicity. You see how the proportion of students in the low category vary from 26% of white students to 40% of Black students. The study shows that these students are the most likely to not demonstrate fundamental reading skills. All of the data I've presented with gaps widening between lower and higher performers in reading were pre-pandemic. How have reading achievement changed since the COVID-19 pandemic? While we have not collected achievement data yet, we do have some indication that the learning experiences of our nation's students are disparate. These disparities can contribute to performance gaps getting larger. IES was commissioned to collect information from schools about learning opportunities they offered students during the pandemic. We have surveyed schools across the country monthly to see if learning opportunities are changing over time. These charts show the percentage of fourth graders who were enrolled in a remote, hybrid, or in-school instructional mode. The light blue line represents in-person instruction. The dark blue is for hybrid, and the gold is for remote. Focusing on the percentage of students who enroll for in-person learning, the light blue lines, you will notice two things. In-person instruction is increasing across racial ethnic groups between January and March, and the percentage of white students enrolled in in-person learning is greater than the percentages of Black, Hispanic, and Asian students. Over half of the white students will enroll in in-person learning in March, compared to a third of Black, Hispanic students and nearly a fifth of Asian students. These differences may exacerbate gaps in performance. We plan to monitor changes and learning opportunities with this monthly school survey, as well as learn about reading achievement with the 2022 administration of NAEP at grades 4 and 8. In closing, here's a reminder of the major takeaways from our recent data. 1, reading achievement is on the decline, particularly for lower performers. 2, we see these declines across racial ethnic groups. 3, lower performers are a mix of characteristics and skills. And 4, differences in learning opportunities during the pandemic may indicate further performance declines. I was only able to cover a small portion of the data and resources available through IES. I implore you to visit ies.ed.gov to discover more information about reading achievement and how you can help students improve their knowledge and skills for a more productive and bright future. Thank you.
Is there anything else that you wanted to add as we're waiting for some of the questions that are coming in about resources that not only NCES may have, but the center, or the rest of the centers at IES, places maybe like RELS or some of the other resources that may be available for folks to find out more about reading?
Can share that all of IES is sharply focused on this issue, not just the National Center for Education Statistics, but the research centers, the evaluation centers. We're all sort of gathering together, trying to figure out how to think about what we're seeing. I invite people to listen throughout today and tomorrow to hear what we've come up with that we want to share. I would also give a special plug for the nation's report card and say that I really only tapped into some of the data that we have. There's so much more. The Data Explorer is a wonderful tool. We have questions that we asked of students, of teachers, and their administrators that can really help some of the data that we're seeing today and generate some really interesting hypotheses. So I await the questions as they come in. Thank you, Gina.
Great, Peggy. I see our first question came in. Wondering if the districts that participate in the testing also fill out a questionnaire on the core instruction products that they use.
Yes, we are very pleased to say that we continue to have 27 tutors. I should say these are large urban districts that have participate in the program and supported by our partner, the Council of Great City Schools. Yes, they do complete a questionnaire. The teachers complete a questionnaire, the schools also complete a questionnaire about their instructional practices, the professional development and qualifications of their teachers, what tools they're using to address issues of low performing students, not directly, but we have coordinators. Gina, you work very closely with not just our state coordinators, but also our tutor coordinators. And they stand ready, I can assure you, to answer any questions about what the tutors are doing specifically around reading and tutoring. And if I remember the agenda just right, we may even have some tutors on our agenda for this 2 days. So please listen in.
Great, thanks. I think there is a session this afternoon with a couple of representatives from our tutor districts. Our next question is from Elizabeth Swanson. What plans does IES have to help the nation's school stakeholders reverse this trend among struggling readers?
Well, you know, the whole IES family is, again, sharply focused on this issue. The director, Mark Snyder, is leading the charge. He certainly is very concerned, and we all are concerned about what it is that we can do to help share what is working. The director is having listening sessions. He's talking to the best of the best in the field, trying to understand what they are uncovering and trying to identify those tools, those practices, those best practices that we can share with others. He's also looking at our grant opportunities and how we can support further analysis into this pandemic and what we're doing to respond to it, not just for reading, but for all of the subjects. So again, stay tuned. We're going to have lots to say about these 2 days.
Great. Our next question is from Catherine Stetter. Does IES NCES have any hypotheses on what's driving the decrease among lower performing students?
Oh, you know, this is so hard. It's really a challenge because, you know, the data that we have really aren't designed. The methodology is not designed to address issues of cause and effect. So we can't speak with any certainty about what's going on, and hypothesizing. I think even hypothesizing requires some more advanced analysis than we've been able to do or had time to do. But just looking at the descriptive data, I think one of the things I tried to describe in my talk today is that this is everybody's problem. This is not a Black and brown problem. It's not a problem just for poor students or students with special needs. We all are in the bottom and represented in the bottom, perhaps disproportionately for some relative to their representation in the population, but nonetheless, we're all there. And it's interesting when you look at those who are eligible or not eligible for free and reduced price lunch, that this pattern across their distribution is still there. Those who are eligible, for example, that are in the higher levels are not dropping in the same way that those who are in the lower levels. So we're sort of stunned. One of the reasons why we're having this talk today is to bring the best of the best together. Practitioners, those with boots on the ground, those who are more policy and have a higher sort of perspective about what might be going on and what people are hypothesizing about, so that we can hear what people have to say. It's not just the data, often it's the qualitative assertion of what is going on that helps us understand where we need to go next. So thank you for your.
Absolutely, that's a great one, and a pretty good segue to our next question from Stephanie Swigert. I think you kind of touched on this already, Peggy. She asks, is the data that links enrollment in the lunch assistance program with lower scores consistent over the last 30 years, or has that data only been identified in the 2019 test?
I'm not sure I quite understand the question. I may have to ask for clarification. Talking about
I think she's just asking about free and reduced price lunch, and if we've seen consistency in the performance of students either eligible or not eligible over the last 30 years of the assessments.
Well, we're a little disappointed that this variable is losing some of its validity, for the purposes that we've been using it for. I guess those who are responsible for this program would say, well, that wasn't what it was intended for, to use it as a surrogate for income or free and reduced price lunch. So yeah, we have seen some decline in the quality of the use of this variable for the purposes of differentiating between our students. But for the gross interpretation that we've been using it for, we're still very comfortable reporting out on these data. And we haven't seen a lot of changes in how these particular categories, free and reduced price lunch, eligible, non-eligible, or doesn't apply. Those categories really haven't changed appreciably. And so I think we can sort of hold fast to what we're seeing. Perhaps later on, the commissioner of NCES he's just such a advocate for the work that he's gotten started on trying to identify better measures of SES, measures that tap into more objective data from the census with census tracts, and being able to hone in on students and where they live, protecting PII, of course. But yes, we're not settling for this free and reduced price lunch variable as our sole indicator.
Great. I know it's been something in my tenure here at NCES that we've always been talking about, trying to really make that variable as useful as possible.
Yeah.
So our next question transitions a little bit more into sort of a policy realm, but from Mohammed Nasir, if this trend continues, do you expect any sort of nationwide legislation, such as what we saw in 2001 with No Child Left Behind? Do you see any need for or leaning towards some sort of nationwide legislation to address the trend of reading performance?
Well, it's hard to predict what Congress will do, what the administration will do. They got a lot on their plate, although I don't think they are ignoring this equity or lack of equity that we're seeing in these data. We're going to hear from Chris Epley, a really good friend and colleague, I think, at the end of this 2 days. And he was the chair of a National Academy of Science project where they actually looked at education indicators, equity indicators, and identified 16 or so indicators. And together they have conceived of them as a system that we need to really track as a nation. So again, stay tuned to see where Chris and his colleagues are trying to take this initiative. And they're being bold and they're thinking big about what the nation should do in tracking equity indicators for the nation.
Great. From Sarah Sparks, you mentioned and shared those great clips from the oral reading fluency study. She asks, do you see any other trends in the kinds of skills that struggling readers seem to be struggling more with over time?
Yeah, Sarah, those were great clips. We have students who were reading nonsense words, and we also had students who were reading, quick passages like this. And I just have to comment, it was stark to see the differences in the struggling readers and the not so struggling readers. One of the things that the reading assessment doesn't really do a good job of is looking at some of those basic decoding skills, some of the skills fundamental skills that you really need, building blocks for reading, because there's a reading comprehension assessment that starts at grade 4, something a little below the average grade 4 reader, but not stretching as low as probably some of these students are. The National Assessment Governing Board is looking into reading now. We're trying to figure out, what this new reading framework will look like. The other thing that we're doing, and again, Gina, I'm hoping that it's on the 2-day schedule, we're going to be looking at process data. It's not just what students tell us in terms of their answers to the questions, it's how they arrived at the question. What is the process? How do they go about coming to their answer? And we have these process data, a different view, more insight into what these students are struggling with. One of the reasons why we did the oral reading study is because we don't measure oral fluency for these students. And we were thinking that we needed a baseline, and we may go back some years later and replicate this study again. So lots to talk about. This is why we have this reading day. We want to hear from those who can give us really good suggestions about where we should go from here. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, great question. I think we have a little bit more time for just a couple more questions. If we didn't have a chance to get to your question, we really appreciate you submitting them, and hopefully over the next couple of days, today and tomorrow, we'll be able to, through all the great sessions, get you answers. The next question we had was from Kelly Gallagher. Do you believe that the scores were influenced by the digital format as opposed to a written administration or paper pencil administration? What are your thoughts on our transition to digitally based assessments for reading?
Well, this is a very technical question, but actually it's the one that I feel most confident about answering. Absolutely not. The bridge studies that we did starting in 2017 as we transadapted, and that's a term that we coined, the paper and pencil items and passages to digitally based were scientifically done and administered to random sample of students, a paper version, based version. So we know without a shadow of a doubt that it had nothing to do with the digital transadapting to the digital format. And we did these types of bridge studies at the state level. We did them at the tutor levels. And then we went back and analyzed by subgroups, all randomly assigned to these various formats. Absolutely no impact whatsoever. So we're very confident in that. We did what we coin as the Cadillac version of bridge studies. And so we're happy to report you can be confident about these findings.
Great, thanks. Our next question is from Wanda Bryant. NAEP if she heard correctly, and you did, Wanda, NAEP proficiency is not the same as grade level proficiency.
Right.
Why the difference? Can you provide a little explanation of what's the difference and why the difference, the definition of proficiencies?
You know, it's a real interesting question, and it keeps coming up decade after decade, this issue about just what is proficient and is it grade level performance? And I think when the levels were set initially decades ago, there was this mention of grade level, and then it was really realized that quickly realized that it's not grade level and removed from the descriptions. And so no, these are aspirational standards. They performance is solid, mastery over challenging subject matter. So it's not grade level. And one of the studies that we refer to every time we get this question is a very popular mapping study where we map these standards onto the NAEP scale and compares it to our proficiency, our more aspirational level of proficiency. And you can see state level proficiency standards, which are probably more grade level, I think could be argued convincingly, are below our proficient level. We're not talking about grade level. We're not talking about something you should expect all students at the 4th, 8th, and 12th grade should know. It is the most challenging standard. But I can say, again, this is the responsibility, as I said in my talk, of the National Assessment Governing Board. And this has not fallen on deaf ears. I think they are thinking very hard and long about how to communicate what proficient is, the NAEP proficient is, and how it does differ from grade level performance. They're going to be looking at the descriptors and seeing if they can improve the messaging around this standard. So thanks again. These have all been great questions. Gina, if there are more, particularly the ones that are more objective that I can answer without absolutely no concern about subjectivity, I would love to do that. Thank you for the opportunity.
Great, thanks, Peggy. I think we have just a couple minutes for one last question if you're okay.
Oh yeah,
with it.
I'm up to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Then we will wrap up for the Q&A. Our last question is for today is from Allison Gentle. She's interested in the student scoring in what we kind of refer as the below basic band, specifically for 4th graders. And she wanted to know whether their difficulties are primarily in decoding or comprehension. And is there any sort of supplementary testing that indicates where students are performing in that below basic? If you could just sort of maybe touch on, for wrapping us up, a little bit about those students that are falling below our traditional performance.
Yeah. This is so worrisome. We actually have what I'm going to coin to be a below basic project going on, where we have different analysts on our staff looking into this below basic category. We had a special panel of experts to take a look at students in the below basic category. And one of the things that I said in my talk today is that they're not monolithic. They're different. I'm not just talking about background of the student. I'm also talking about what they know and can do. They're all not the same. There are like 3 distinct categories of students in the below basic. Those right, what we call borderline below basic. I think I mentioned the number of words that the students can read fluently, and the lowest level is 71 words per minute, middle 95, and higher 108 compared to 120 for everyone above, basic and above. So they're not monolithic in terms of their ability to decode and to read fluently. But I have to just say, we are a little remiss in our program because we know more about what these students don't know in the below basic category than what they do know. Why is that? It's because we don't have a lot of items that map in the bottom of the distribution. There are very few questions that they can answer correctly. And so we don't know a lot about what they know and can do. So we're going to be working on that, trying to develop items that map at the lower end, looking at some of our process data, working with our colleagues on the NAEP side who are responsible for the framework to help us think through how the framework can better guide the item development so that we can have items more populated at the bottom of the distribution. There is so much to be said about the below basic category, especially when you have whole jurisdictions whose average score is down there, that we don't have time to get to it. But this is a wonderful way to end this segment and perhaps spark some insights for people to ask additional questions and ponder about students in this below basic category throughout the next couple of days. Gina, you're on mute, but I know that you're saying something lovely.
Sorry, thank you for, thought I had gotten used to turning off that mute button, but just thank you so much for joining us for this live Q&A and for your presentation and your leadership at NCES and within the assessment division.